Alright, this is Rollins Pass. Kind of a bucket list item for me, in that I'm a huge railroad fan, and this was the original way over the Continental Divide to Salt Lake City from Denver before the Moffat Tunnel was built. I consider this a bucket item list because I've never really gone very far in a pickup truck up this trail. In regards to railroads, this was an operational nightmare. Nearly year-round, but mostly in the winter and spring, as they would get 10-foot tall drifts and whatnot over the rails, and they couldn't run the trains. And it was a 24/7 operation to keep the rails clear of snow. There's actually a town at the very top, at Rollins Pass, the very top, called Corona. And it was a town underneath a snow shed, which is unique. And all the way up this were snow sheds to keep snow off the rails. Again, it was an operational nightmare for that railroad. So most of this trail follows the old railroad roadbed. It deviates a little bit in parts. The main attractions up here is Yankee Doodle Lake and Ginny Lake. There's a couple railroad trestles, and at the very top, right before Corona, it's called Needle's Eye Tunnel, which has been closed since the early 90s from a cave-in. Somewhere around here there's a car off the side. I think that might have been it right there. But when you have an ATV or a side-by-side, this road, isn't too bad. But you get people trying to come up here in Honda Civics and whatnot. And like I said, it's kind of a bucket list item because I've taken my own truck up here years and years ago. I've taken my own truck, and my father's taken his truck, and we've made it, probably not much farther than where we are right now. I mean, it's just really bumpy. But an ATV or a RZR or whatnot, man, you just fly up it, no big deal. It's about 12 and a half miles from where we started at the truck to the base of Needle's Eye Tunnel. And then you can come in from the Winter Park side, which is the west side of Rollins Pass, they consider it. And you can actually go over Rollins Pass and Corona. There's nothing left up there except for foundations of the buildings and whatnot. Not long after the railroad abandoned the rails, that the town of Corona and most of the snow sheds burned. It's still considered a mystery how everything caught on fire. But considering the railroad actually battled the ICC for a while to abandon the rails, that it would be far-fetched to say that they're the ones that actually burned it down. Right after the Moffat Tunnel was built was when the Denver and Rio Grande Western acquired the rights and took over the Denver and Salt Lake Railroad. And that's my favorite railroad, is the Denver and Rio Grande Western. It sure is pretty up here. This is June 22nd, and my understanding is there's usually quite a bit of snow at the top, even this time of year. And there's been cases where there's plenty of snow even well into August that actually makes it impassable at the very top, not down here. So you can see, if you're dealing with snow in August, you can imagine what December, January, and February was like for the railroad. And if I'm smart enough, I'll figure out a way to insert images with this video to show the town of Corona underneath the snow sheds, and maybe some of the railroad. Oh man, look at those mud posts. Katie and Dubs would have liked that. Woo! So like this section here, you know, you're in a Jeep or a pickup truck, you got to go pretty slow. And I'm going almost 30. And I barely feel anything. So really the plan is kind of bomb up, go around Yankee Doodle and Jenny Lake, and then on the way down I'll probably take some pictures and stuff. There's some old railroad ties still in the ground there. I mean, if you could imagine the locomotives struggling up this, I believe this is a 4% grade, struggling up this. Operational nightmare. And the thing of it was, it got to a point that the railroad basically just ran it as an excursion, kind of like a tourist excursion for sightseeing and passengers, and not so much as for freight. It wasn't worth it running freight over this pass. It was easier for a shipper to just use the Rio Grande and go down to Pueblo and then go up Real Gorge to Tennessee Pass, and then on its way to Salt Lake City than it was to struggle over this. That wasn't until the Moffat Tunnel opened. Once the Moffat Tunnel opened and the Rio Grande took it over, then you had a straight shot to Salt Lake City from Denver. And that's kind of how the Rio Grande ran it. They called it rail blazing, where instead of running long freight trains like the Union Pacific over Sherman Hill, say 110 cars with 3 locomotives, the Rio Grande would break up that train and run like 35, 40 cars and several locomotives and just bomb it and go as fast as they could. So you can look at it from each perspective. Long trains but slow, or short trains but fast. A lot of people know about the ski train that ran from Denver to Winter Park. This is the original ski train. This is where they got the idea to run Denver over Rollins Pass into Winter Park. Surprised how wide the road is here. I don't know if I've seen on very many maps where the snow sheds used to be way back in the day. That to me seemed like a good place for one, especially for how wide it is here. To Jenny Creek. We'll come back down to that one. Overlook. Man, look at that. Beautiful. Then you can see the alpine, or the elevation gets high enough that the trees don't grow. There's a railroad Y to turn the snow plows and stuff. As they'd be plowing, and then they use this Y here to turn it around. That's pretty cool. The railroad that used originally went over Rollins Pass was the Denver and North Park, and I believe the saying goes 45 to 50% of their operating budget for the entire railroad was to snow removal. Look at that. Look at that. Love it. You know, that's what makes worth owning something like this, is you get to see stuff like that. Tundra. That's interesting to me, that the nature, there's like that cutoff line where trees don't grow. They get to that point in elevation, they're like, nope, ain't gonna do it. And that's why it's good to have fuel injection here in Colorado. You get to these higher elevations with a carburetor, it can be a little bit of a hassle. Pretty sure that's just the campsite there. There aren't too many pull-offs on this trail. There's the Jenny Creek one, which we passed. And then the road will split up here. Off to the left, we'll go to Needle's Eye Tunnel. And then down to the right, will actually take you right down to Yankee Doodle Lake and Jenny Lake. Speed limit 15. Some campers. I like that view.